I love this show, and this is my favorite episode so far. Whoa, don't click away. You might have misunderstood what I meant. I don't think the show is good. In fact, I think it's atrocious. It's very, very bad. But a couple of episodes ago, round about the time they went, boom, Mount Doom origin story. How do you like that one? And I'm like, what? What do you mean? That was bad. Ooh, that was bad. And I kind of got frustrated and annoyed, but then I kind of turned and transitioned into having fun with the madness and the insanity and just the general horrendous nature of the show. And so now I am just here for the nonsense, here for the insanity, and this whole episode was pure chaos in the worst way, but I had so much fun with it. The whole episode is pretty much going, who's Sauron? It's unbridled nonsense, and I'm all here for it. Rings of Power has spent its first season with two main characters, and both of them have been mystery boxes. The first one we have is Meteor Man, or as I prefer to call him, Young Sexy Gandalf, because he is 100% Young Sexy Gandalf. And the other character is Halbrand, a character not from Tolkien's literature, a new character for the show, who is very obviously Sauron from pretty much the third episode. Every single line of dialogue he says is pretty much him, like, telling us without telling us that he is Sauron. And as soon as he was like, I love to smith things, I'm some kind of smith. Bloody love just being a blacksmith. I just love smithing. And I'm like, Sauron likes smithing because he made the One Ring, and he made that via blacksmithing, I think. I made rings in Skyrim via blacksmithing. I know things. And I feel like the same inevitability applies for Young Sexy Gandalf, because he just looks like Young Sexy Gandalf. He's got the beard, he looks like a Gandalf. Like, he just looks like Gandalf. He's got, like, the robes and stuff, and he's got magical powers. So the finale opens with Young Sexy Gandalf wandering through the woods. He's all alone. He's scared. And then the three spooky Sauron minions, you know, the one that looks like Slim Shady, and the other two that are also there, and they're all like, ooh, spooky man. We know who you are. You're our master, the Dark Lord Sauron. And it's like, oh, big reveal. But it falls so flat. Like, it's just such a weird moment, because the whole season has been like, is Young Sexy Gandalf, or is he Sauron? Ooh, Sauron, he's got magical powers, he's evil. But all the reasons and signs and whatever you want to call them to, like, point that he is Sauron feel so small and so much more like just very obvious bad red herrings compared to Halbrand, where every single line of dialogue, if you just think about that he is Sauron, it's so much more obvious. And, like, if you think about the idea that one of the characters is going to be like, I'm Sauron, you have to have characters around them that go, oh my god, but you are my friend, Halbrand! And so Halbrand being Sauron makes sense, because Galadriel will then be like, Halbrand, how could you? Whereas if Sauron goes, I'm Sauron, to all the little hobbits, they're going to be like, who? Who's Sauron? So it's a bizarre cold open, but I kind of love it, because the show is just so obviously being like, hey, it's definitely this guy, but do you believe us? And I'm like, no. And then what follows is my favorite moment in the whole episode, where Halbrand is suddenly creeping about the Forge Smith place where they make the Rings of Power. It's the title of the show. And he's skulking about, and the actor has a different expression and tone in his voice, and just an entirely different attitude. He's essentially a new character at this point, because he's been told, hey, at this point, we have confirmed that Young Sexy Gandalf is in fact Sauron, so you must be the Witch King, or I don't know, that zombie guy from the third movie. I don't know, you're not Sauron. He's like, so, but I am Sauron. That's when you cast me, you said I'm Sauron. They're like, oh no, you're absolutely Sauron. So just Sauron, just get your Sauron on. I can literally imagine just like them filming it, and he's just like, so I feel like I'm being a very different character now, and the director's just like, add more Sauron to it, and he's just like, all right, it's gonna come across pretty strong, and they're like, yeah. And I love it. It's so funny. And like, sell him draws. I should know the name, but I just don't, I'm sorry. Third elf that's not the main two from that movie that I love, he's like, ooh, what are you doing skulking around here? And why is it all spooky and dark in this room now? And I'm feeling unnerved, and the music's all like, ooh, it's a bit ominous, and ooh. And then they start bonding over forging rings, and I think they're meant to make it feel very obvious to us. And all of this I absolutely love, because it was just so fun for them to be like, it's definitely not Sauron, because we just revealed that it's Sauron, but he's so obviously Sauron, and he's just manipulating them all, being like, ooh, maybe if we get the Mithril, and we put a little bit of something in this, and we do this, and maybe we could make some kind of powerful weapon of power. And it was just so fun, because it's just like, he's Sauron! I literally screamed at the TV like 5 times, just being like, he's Sauron! What are you doing, you fools? But of course, Galadriel has to be one step ahead of the game, and so third elf that I can't remember the name of starts with a C. Sea elf. Not in that way. I'm not calling him a sea elf. You know. I promise. Even though that word it has a different tone here, it's more of a friendly, like a mateship kind of. I won't get into it. And Sea Elf says a spooky, evil Mordor word, and Galadriel's like, who said that? And he's like, I don't know. I'm all foggy in the head. And then Galadriel's like, was Halbrand there? I'm super sus on Halbrand for no reason all of a sudden. And then she goes and does some investigating or whatever and gets a scroll and is like, this scroll says you weren't the Southland's king. And there's a really bizarre moment where he goes, oh, Galadriel, you found me out. But it's like, you could just say, that scroll is incomplete. You guys have no idea. Like, I just, I was a bastard son. I was this, I was that. There are so many avenues. I kind of like the idea that he's like, I was kind of having fun with this little, like, ruse, being little secret Sauron here. But now it's time to be full Sauron. And I have been waiting for this moment. I've honestly been waiting. Like, every episode, I'm just like, I can't wait for him to just be like, I'm Sauron, Galadriel. And she'd be like, ah! And on one hand, I would have loved the idea of a show where Sauron and Galadriel were really close friends, and I loved their friendship, and it was a brutal, heartbreaking betrayal, and the moment of realization was devastating and tragic, and, other good, complex words to describe the situation if it was written well. But, on the other hand, what we got with that insane nightmare sequence where they're on the boat screaming at each other, I had so much fun. I was laughing like a maniac. It was like actual physical laughter, like I was watching the funniest comedy of all time. It reminded me of watching Anchorman the first time, but instead of laughing with the movie, I was just laughing at this show. Biggest highlights from the Sauron reveal was the moment where they're just looking at each other, just being like, rah, 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 and Galadriel's just so like, rah, 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 rah. I love that they're like, now that he's Sauron, we can make his face all dark and evil. There's also the beautiful shot in the reflection where he gets his iconic, infamous, I suppose, little horn helmet thingy. I also find it absolutely baffling that the final kind of clincher for her, like he's trying to convince her, is like, hey, I didn't even like Morgoth. When he died, I was like, I'm so keen to be good now. I was actually a slave for Morgoth, and I didn't like being all nasty, evil. So he's trying to convince her and, befriend her and all that scheming evil things. And she doesn't really fall for it. But the last thing she says, she's like, we're going to save the world, or are we going to rule the world? And he's like, I don't see a difference between saving and ruling. And she's like, that's why I can't join you, Sauron, you're evil. But she was totally happy for him to rule when he was going to be the Southland's king. Like, she was encouraging it the whole time for him to be a ruler. So it just feels like a weird thing, because he was going to save and rule as the king of the Southlands. But now that he has a dark past, even though he did tell her, as he says in this episode, like, I told you I had a dark past, and you said, oh, it doesn't matter, you can't be, Sauron. But now he's like, my dark past was Sauron. She's like, that's too much for me. And I understand why it's too much for her, because like, she's been chasing Sauron, she doesn't like Sauron, Sauron killed her brother, It all makes sense. It just feels like a weird way to kind of position and frame the conversation to be like, save, rule, no difference, you're evil. He was going to save and rule as the other guy. So it's just not well written. Another baffling, insane decision. Galadriel's like, Elrond, ooh, something bad happened with Halbrand. I can't tell you, even though you would totally understand and not judge me if I said it was Sauron. He deceived me, he tricked me, he did his classic Sauron thingy. But instead she's like, no, we can't do this evil magical ring situation. We can't do this. Or maybe, actually, no, let's do this, but have 3? Not 2, but 3. Let's add another ring into the mix. I just don't understand. It's baffling to me. They make a reasoning for, 1's corrupt, 2, there'll be angry enemies, but 3, 3's the magic number, there'll be unity. And all I kept thinking was, no, with 3, 2 of them could gang up on one of them, or one of them could be so much powerful and kill 2 of them. I don't know. I just think there's always going to be problems no matter how many numbers there are. You're just saying words as if it's truth, but it's just nonsense. And I cannot stress this enough. I love it! And so we finally get the forging of the Rings of Power. The titular Rings of Power, finally. And I just can't help but wonder, is season 2 just going to be like a new character being like, I'm definitely not suspect and not Sauron. Dwarves want to make some cool magical rings with that sweet mithril stuff. And then just again with the men. Or are we going to time jump and they'll have done it? I thought this all happened at once with like all the rings being forged together. I didn't know they were so separate, but also my knowledge of the lore is, you know, bad. Not as bad as the writers of the show though, because every time I go online, everyone's just like, this is the most lore-breaking show of all time. So I guess lore doesn't matter, so I guess they can just do whatever. I also very, very much enjoyed all the clunky, horrific dialogue around them trying to like get the magical mithril like substance into different alloys to create the ring. And like we all know it's building to like the rings of power. Oh, what's the name of the series? But the way they kind of slowly went down, like they're like, ooh, we could build a scepter. And he's like, no, it has to be circular because the magic has to flow in a circle because of the light or something. And then he's like, maybe a crown. And then at one point he's like, maybe it has to be smaller, more like the size of a ring, maybe some kind of ring of power. And it's so silly. Everything came across like a parody. Like this is a satirical parody. It felt like they were trying to get a rise out of me. Like they were trying to make the most stupid, clunky, idiotic dialogue to generate laughs. It was a comedy. This is a farcical comedy at this point. And honestly, I had so much fun. Like it's easily my favorite episode. I felt like it didn't do anything properly. It didn't do anything right. The only moment in the episode that I thought worked at all was the Numenorians somehow when they're on the boat and the blind queen is trying to do a bit of a walk and the Isildur's father, Elendil, he's like, I don't know, he's a really great actor. He gives a lot of gravitas and like you're feeling to the character, and their interaction was actually really good. Imagine the show if that was like how every scene felt. Like it would just be such a wild, amazing show. But honestly, I'm kind of glad it's gone in this completely other direction, because it's not like kind of bad where like some scenes don't work and it's just a bit boring and you're kind of like, oh, I'm just not very interested. It has gotten so stupid and insane. I just love it. So we've discussed our Sauron reveal. How brand is Sauron? Yeah, we know. We've been watching the show and he keeps telling us without telling us that he's Sauron. So then who is young sexy Gandalf that they said was Sauron but he's not Sauron? He's young sexy Gandalf. Because of course he's young sexy Gandalf. It couldn't be more obvious. He's a giant man with long hair and a beard and he's got magical wizard powers. But I never thought they would stoop to such impossibly bad prequel just cringe. It's just... Oh, okay, let's discuss. So all our favourite little Hobbit characters, Lady Frodo, Lady Samwise, the other two that are there, was the other one, other three, the other ones that were there as well. They've got their sweet Hobbit camouflage stuff where they seem to have the right materials for wherever they are. They've just got, it's crazy camouflage. It's like a video game where it's nonsense to me. And they have an epic duel with Slim Shady / the other two Sauron minions, and there's a big, epic, magical duel. And it's easily the worst magical duel I've seen in a very long time. It's probably the worst action scene in the show, even though that Warg one early on with the hyena, like, Warg, I didn't like that one. And I also didn't like the time the elf had a punchy punch with the big orc and neither of them remembered to bring swords to the fight. That was pretty bad too. There was also the other one. You know what? I'm going to get sidetracked mentioning every fight scene in the show because they've all been pretty bad. But this one was particularly bad because it had a weird, slow feeling to it. The whole fight really reminded me of the Sand Snakes in Game of Thrones. Slim Shady and her two Sauron minions, they're doing like weird, slow things where they'd like throw two knives really quickly. Someone would get pinned and they'd be like, oh no! And then they would like slowly get the third one out and be like, ooh, I'm giving you a bit of time to prepare because those first two didn't hurt you, but this one might. Ribbidi-boo! We've got really slow, clunky staging and everything just feels really off and weird. It did remind me essentially of just the Sand Snakes battles / the Leia chase from Obi-Wan. Like it just had this odd staging where I'm like, I don't know if it's just the edit, if it's what happened on set, but it's a combination of everything, but somewhere they should have been able to figure it out to make it not so bad. But like there's a point where the one that dies, the Hobbit that dies, whatever his name is, who cares, and he grabs the character and he's like holding them and he's like, go! And it's just so slow and awkward. The characters keep moving, like they'll get the fire in their hands and they'll just be like, ooh, I'm evil Slim Shady, I got fire in my hands, just... give me 3 to 4 minutes and then, oh, you're gonna be lit on fire. And it's like, give me punchy, fast action, like, boom, boom, bam, 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 bam. Make them terrifying and scary. They came across as absolutely incompetent, absolute schmucks. It was just, It was embarrassing. And the times they did magic and were like pushing Gandalf around and all these things, it was just so like you could see him get lifted up and just go, burr, 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 burr. I could like see the strings, even though their $1 billion budget painted the strings out. I could see them. It was really weird. But as I have said time and time again, I am choosing to have fun with all of this. So when the fight started, I was like, ooh, cool, action, magic. I love magic. And then when it started getting really bad, I was just like, okay. Wait, no, Jax, no, don't be negative. Don't get angry. Embrace the cringe. Embrace the horror that is this awful, awful show. And I've got to say, as soon as you just kind of switch that dial and like look at it as a different frame, like look at it as a parody, it's so much fun. Like there are some nonsense lines of dialogue. Like the moment where they're like, oh no, he's not Sauron, he's the other one. I am good. And then the good light power shoots out, and then the Sauron minions, Slim Shady and her 2 minions, the bloody sand snakes of this show, they explode into light, but as they explode, they turn into what look like the kind of the Witch King kind of looks, like the ring race, that kind of gives that little look for a second, but then their face turns to... Just give me a sec. Their faces turn into magical butterflies, and they explode as butterflies. I don't know how to read that. I thought butterflies were meant to be like on the good side. Maybe they were moths. Although I just call the moths evil. They're just ugly butterflies. Ugly people can be good. I'd like to consider myself good. Sometimes. It's a lie. The other highlight of this action scene was when Slim Shady's looking down at the hobbit she thought she'd killed, and he looks up at her, and he gets up his knife, and he goes, ha ha ha, I'm going to stab you because you thought I was dead, but I'm not dead. And like the clock's like it's ticking. I'm like, she could fireball him, just fireball him. But she just looks at him, and she's like, oh, I thought I got you, but it looks like I didn't get you. And then he stabs her in the foot, and then she's like, what is happening? Actually, now I'm thinking about it, maybe it wasn't Slim Shady, it was one of the Sand Snake minion ones. It doesn't matter. They're all dead now. They exploded into butterflies. And then we get the closing moments where all the hobbits are like, we're off to do hobbit stuff, gypsy hobbit stuff. Let's go traveling. And then Gandalf's like, I better go do some cool stuff in season 2 because I don't know, like this was just because I'm Gandalf and I love hobbits, so I have to start with hobbits apparently because we're creatively bankrupt, because we're a prequel series of a good IP, and that means we have to be creatively bankrupt. Better Call Saul is the only good example, I suppose, and I guess it's just so good. Like Better Call Saul is just so good. It took all the good out of any other prequel series of a popular IP. Like they're not allowed to be good because Better Call Saul is so good, which I don't think is fair. I don't think it's fair Better Call Saul took all the good prequel juice, but I guess they took all the good prequel juice, and now Rings of Power is just running off budget juice. I know I've said my favorite bit a lot, but there was a lot of really great, awful moments. Just so bad that I just love them so much. But I think the one that probably takes the cake is when young, sexy Gandalf, who I will just now to refer to as Gandalf because he's not that young and he's not that sexy. And just for a clarification, you haven't watched the other reviews where I explained it at some point. I mean, I think I explained it. It doesn't matter. But the idea of calling him young, sexy Gandalf was just because as soon as he arrived, I'm like, well, it's a prequel. You got to do the prequel thing. Like, in the prequel series of Harry Potter, we got young, sexy Dumbledore. So I was like, this guy's young, sexy Gandalf. And I do know he's not that young and he's not that sexy. I mean, each to their own. I guess I'm just comparing him to Jude Law. Like, he's not as sexy as Jude Law. But not many people are sexy compared to Jude Law. I'm sure I could list sexy people. And you'd be like, well, not sexy compared to Jude Law, because that man's sexy. And so young, sexy Gandalf is like, we better go this way or this way, young Lady Frodo character. And she's like, oh, but my feet are iron and I can't turn back. And he's like, well, you better lead the way. And I'm like, ha, like with Frodo. And Frodo's like, oh, but Gandalf, I do not know the way. And then she's like, oh, but young, sexy Gandalf, I do not know the way. I'm like, just blatantly steal lines from the best movie ever. Just blatantly steal the lines from the best movie ever made. That is fine. That's fine. And then young, sexy Gandalf turns around and he's like, oh. And then I remember thinking just before it happened, I was like, oh, we better go this way. The air isn't so foul down this way. And I said that to myself and laughed out loud. And then he's like, oh, the sweet summer berries are going this way. Oh, we better go this way. I'm sorry, what? Because when in doubt, Lady Frodo, always follow your nose. so shameless, so lazy, so boring. It's just so obvious. Like, the big man with a beard and hair, and they're like, who is he? Sauron or another character? He's clearly Gandalf. End of the season, quoting Gandalf. And it's like, this is the origin story of Gandalf. Great. He met a bunch of unlikable hobbits, and for that reason, he loves all the likable hobbits later. Fantastic. Back to good cringe moments. We get a beautiful shot of Mount Doom, and you're like, oh, at least CGI can look good sometimes in this show, because sometimes I don't know why it looks so bad. And then we get evil Sauron, and now he's got a bit of an evil hood going, and he's all like, ooh, I'm evil. He's got a bit of black eyeliner, or I'm just imagining that. Who cares? It doesn't matter. And we get a beautiful shot where you're like, oh, did you think that Gandalf thing was a bit on the nose? Well, how about we have the same esque music, like esque. It's like budget Lord of the Rings music. And you remember when Frodo and Sam are like, oh, are we ever going to see our friends again? And it's sad and melancholy. And the journey continues, and Mount Doom looms in the background, and the hobbits walk off into the mountains. Imagine that, but Sauron in a creepy coat, and he walks off into Mordor, and he's like, oh, my home, it was the Southlands. Oh, do you get it? I was king of the Southlands, but the Southlands is Mordor now, because I'm king of Mordor. Oh, it's so... I said I was having fun, but sometimes just the hatred, it seeps in, and I'm not having fun anymore, and I get a little annoyed, and then I get really annoyed, and then I have to just take a deep breath and remember that it's just a show, and Lord of the Rings still exists. And then to cap it all off, we get someone who's doing their best Enya impression, or it's Enya and they paid her way too much money, and she just sings what I have to presume is lines from the book, but it just comes across as like really weird. She's doing the same like kind of like vibe, like the way that like the cadence, I think is how you say it, like the way the music goes, like the way it just feels and flows is the same as the Fellowship of the Ring at the end of the music. Or the Two Towers. I'm pretty sure it's Fellowship of the Ring. But she's just being like, 3 rings for the elves. And it's just... It's so bad. I'm going to start talking about this show now. Thank God. I've had so much fun, but geez, like now I've come to the end of this. I'm exhausted and tired, and I'm sad.